People who are dumb enough to believe that wind energy can supply this nation's power needs. And gentlemen, we're often told by libtards, Kata Video is one of them, and I know the janitor from Chicago is another one who is in love with renewable energy. We're often told by these libtards that wind energy is a great renewable source of energy. It can save us from evil, mythical, anthropogenic global warming, but that's not the topic of this. It's wind energy, and I do need to mention this at the beginning that you could take a Democrat speech on wind energy and substitute that with the word nuclear and you would have a Republican speech. Or ethanol and you would have a Republican or a Democrat speech. I am against any taxpayer subsidies for energy. I don't care if it's nuclear or clean coal. It can survive on its own. It should survive on its own, but wind can't. Just need to mention that. Another item that needs to be mentioned is currently we cannot store wind power for later use, such as higher usage times in the summer. When the technology eventually exists to store wind power, perhaps then angel investors will flock to it and it won't require subsidies. The wind industry would die without taxpayer subsidies and loan guarantees, period. Same goes for the ethanol industry, which unfortunately most politicians love. Let's start with the contention that wind power is cleaner. The reason it's not is because it always requires some sort of fossil fuel backup. Perhaps you libtards haven't discerned that the wind doesn't blow all the time, nor do most wind farms operate anywhere near capacity, which I'll get to shortly. Is wind power cleaner? No. By 2020, again, underneath the video I'll have all the relevant information you can check out. By 2020, for example, California will require utilities to obtain 33% of their electricity from renewables. About 30 states, including Connecticut, Minnesota, and Hawaii, are requiring major increases in the production of renewable electricity in the coming years. You'll have to excuse my phone ringing. Wind, not solar or geothermal sources, will provide most of this electricity. It's the only renewable source that can rapidly scale up to meet the requirements of the mandates. This means billions more in taxpayer subsidies for the wind industry and higher electricity costs for consumers. None of it will lead to major cuts in carbon emissions for two reasons. First, wind blows only intermittently and variably. Second, wind-generated electricity largely displaces power produced by natural gas-fired generators rather than from plants burning more carbon-intensive and evil coal. Because wind blows intermittently, electric utilities must either keep their conventional power plants running all the time to make sure the lights don't go dark, or continually ramp up and down the output from conventional coal or gas-fired generators called cycling. But coal-fired and gas-fired generators are designed to run continuously, and if they don't, fuel consumption and emissions generally increase. A car analogy helps explain. An automobile that operates at a constant speed, say 55 miles per hour, will have better fuel efficiency and emit less pollution per mile traveled than one that is stuck in stop-and-go traffic. Recent research strongly suggests how this problem defeats the alleged carbon-reducing virtues of wind power. In April, Bentech Energy, a Colorado-based energy analytics firm, looked at power plant records in Colorado and Texas. It was commissioned by the Independent Petroleum Association of the Mountain States. Bentech concluded that despite huge investments, wind-generated electricity has had minimal, if any, impact on carbon dioxide emissions. Bentech found that thanks to the cycling of Colorado's coal-fired plants in 2009, at least 94,000 more pounds of carbon dioxide were generated because of the repeated cycling. In Texas, Bentech estimated that the cycling of power plants due to increased use of wind energy resulted in a slight savings of carbon dioxide, 600 tons in 2008, and a slight increase of about 1,000 tons in 2009. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has estimated the potential savings from a nationwide 25% renewable electricity standard, a goal in the Waxman-Markey energy bill that narrowly passed the House last year. Best case scenario, about 306 million tons less CO2 by 2030. Given that the agency expects annual U.S. carbon emissions to be about 6.2 billion tons in 2030, that expected reduction will only equal about 4.9% of emissions nationwide. That's not much when you consider that the Hussein Obama administration wants to cut CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050. This is a joke. Even the National Academy of Science and environmentalist researchers in the UK, Netherlands, Denmark, Canada, and Australia all conclude that wind power will thus not reduce carbon emissions. It will only slow the increase by a small amount. Next, wind power is also subject to wild capacity fluctuations. Because any wind power is a function of the cube of the wind speed along a narrow wind speed range, typically 9 to 33 miles an hour, small changes in wind speed translate into large changes in the amount of wind energy convertible to electricity. Consequently, wind generation is relentlessly fluctuating according to the whimsy of its power source between zero production, which occurs 10 to 15% of the time, and its maximum possible performance, its rated capacity, which is achieved very rarely. Over the course of a year, a wind project, if sited in good wind territory, produces an average yield of about 25 to 30% of its rated capacity. About 60% of the time, it produces less. Excuse me. Here's an example of routine wind flux culled at random from a Bonneville Power Administration posting for a brief period on January 1st, 2009. BPA had 1,600 megawatts of installed wind. At this time, the actual wind generation was 443 megawatts in the first minute. 5 minutes later, it was 454. Then it was 476. Then 489. Then 505, etc. 3 hours later, it had fallen below 200 megawatts and continued downward. Occasionally, wind production involves very wide swings across nearly the whole range of its rated capacity, dropping or rising precipitously in less than an hour. Consider the impact of this flux if the installed wind capacity were 5,000 megawatts instead of 1,600. If demand slackens by 5 megawatts, then exactly 5 megawatts of production is withdrawn from the grid, typically under automatic generation controls. Conversely, if there is 10 megawatts of increased demand, then exactly 10 megawatts of supply is ratcheted up. This kind of manageability is known as capacity value. Conventional generators, coal, natural gas, evil coal, natural gas, nuclear, and hydro, which together account for 95% of the nation's electricity power, must pass stringent tests of reliability and precision performance before they are deployed. All of their electricity generation is capable of being dispatched on command, since they have firm capacity, typically producing their rated capacities when asked to do so, maintaining a steady energy level throughout their operating time, except when they are called upon to ramp up or back down in response to demand changes. Unreliable wind volatility is the antithesis of supply stability. It has no capacity value. Installing more wind energy into the power grid will actually work towards destabilizing it, unless your goal is rolling brownouts. Wind power is not living up to its expectations in Scotland. Scotland's wind farms have produced only around half of the amount of power they were expected to this year. The government has blamed the low generation levels on unusually calm weather, spurred by global warming, maybe. But critics said the figures showed the danger of becoming too dependent on renewable energy. Turbines are expected to operate at an average output of about 30% of their maximum installed capacity, but the average output over 5 months this year was 17%, just over half the expected average. Ooh, that's pretty good. Stuart Young carried out the research by analyzing data from the Balancing Mechanism Reporting System website, which the National Grid uses to monitor generation. The site provides a constant flow of information on output from 1,588 megawatt wind farms in Scotland. His research showed that for 80% of the time between February and June, Scotland's turbines were operating at less than 30%. And for almost a third of the time, they were operating at less than 5% of their maximum output, meaning they were virtually becalmed. Only 9 times between February and June had the wind farms achieved 30% efficiency for a full day at a time. There were long stretches such as from May 16th to May 29th, April 9th to 15th, and February 6th to February 23rd when they failed to reach 30% output. It's not doing any better in the UK. A report from Britain says the analysis of power output found that more than 20 wind farms are operating at less than 1/5 of their full capacity. Experts say many turbines are going up on sites that are simply not breezy enough. They also accuse developers of grossly exaggerating the amount of energy they will generate in order to get their hands on subsidies, taxpayer-funded subsidies, designed to boost the production of green power. More energy from wind also means higher electricity prices. Dateline, California. Households that get their power from the LA Department of Water and Power could see their electric bills go up between 8.8% and 28.4%. Good for the middle class, huh? Depending on where they live and how much energy they use under a plan unveiled in March by Mayor Antonio I'm going to butcher his name. We'll just call him Mayor Antonio. Pairing with labor and environmental wacko leaders, imagine that, union goons in on it, Villaraigosa said the proposed increases would ensure that the DWP meets its goal of securing 20% of its energy from renewable sources such as wind and solar by December 31st. Under the plan, households that use the smallest amounts of electricity, technically known as Tier 1 customers, would see an average increase of 8.8%. Those customers make up 58% of DWP's residential ratepayers. Tier 2 customers who use more power make up 36% of the utilities. Residential customers would see an average increase of 16.8% to 18.9%. Tier 3 customers who use the most power and make up the remaining 6% would face hikes in their electric bills of 24.4% to 28.4%, according to the documents provided by the mayor's office. In the hotter San Fernando Valley, where ratepayers receive a slight break on their bills, the average Tier 1 customer would see monthly electric bills jump from $38.76 to $42.17 by April 2011. Tier 2 would increase from $92.19 to $107.60, according to the proposal. Businesses would see increases in the average bill ranging from 20 to 26%. Those costs will be passed on to consumers, so there's more. If you're a Tier 1 customer shopping there, you're going to pay more because they will pass it on to you. California's renewable energy mandates have caused the state to practice energy colonialism, relying on Arizona, Oregon, Nevada, et al. To pick up the slack. Even with a mild climate, the average residential electricity bill in California is 30% higher than the national average. How about Germany? In 2008, 6.3% of Germany's electricity production was from wind, followed by 3.6% from biomass and 3.1% from water. In 2008, the price markup due to green energy subsidies amounted to 7.5% of average household electricity prices. Keep in mind that German residential electricity prices are already high at about 30 cents per kilowatt hour. The average American pays less than 12 cents per kilowatt hour. I'm sure Germans appreciate those high electricity bills. And lastly, wind power requires a lot of space too. The Nature Conservancy, a U.S. EnviroKook group, published a report last year estimating that wind power requires about 30 times as much land as nuclear energy, and 4 times as much land for natural gas. Here's another little factoid for you. Wind generation increased by 25% in the U.S. from 2007 to 2008 and has more than tripled since 2003. Despite this growth, the world still generated less than 1% of its total electricity from wind power in 2008, overtaking the previous leader Germany. The United States led all other countries in wind power generation in 2008. However, a mere 1.3% of U.S. electricity was generated from wind power, with no offshore wind farms, because Ted Kennedy doesn't like them in his area. Of course, he can't do anything about it now. The only reason is taxpayer subsidies. Without that, wind energy would be gone with the wind. So if you hear somebody like McStupid, the janitor, or Kata Video, or some other loon talking about how wind energy is, oh, it's great, it can save us, you can laugh at them because it's utter BS. Someday, maybe, if they can figure out how to store the electricity, it'll become good. It'll become something people want to fund. Until then, it will rely on subsidies. I say cut off all subsidies for any of those. Get rid of the rent-seeking. Let them survive on their own. But liberal ideas always require someone else's money. Have a nice day, and don't thank me now for the info.